Imagine if you could catch glimpses of a perfect world. One that was like paradise. For Hugo, this was possible. He could see it when he was in great pain. Everyone in that place was happy and lived a fulfilled life. They were like saints because their thoughts and actions were pure. These people were extremely thoughtful, kind, and caring. No one was sick or struggled with poverty. They were such a good example to him that he became inspired to write about what he saw and immediately achieved success as a fantasy fiction writer because of it. But he always told people that what he was writing about was real, though no one believed him. He could spend hours lost in thought after witnessing the spectacular richness and peacefulness of that world. It made him long for that peace and love in the real world, but he was left disappointed because nothing seemed to measure up to that perfect world. He didn't really want to be sad, but he was when he didn't get a vision of loveliness every once in a while. The fact is that he would never have connected or become invested in living his own life in the real world if it wasn't for a friend named Victoria who had known him since he was a young boy. He trusted her and loved her because she had always been in his life and she did not judge him for being weird. He felt she understood him the most, so one day Hugo plucked up the nerve and proposed to Victoria while they were in a ranch together in the countryside. They had a themed wedding inspired by Hugo's books and got married, promising to stay faithful to each other in sickness and in health. Victoria was very happy as she felt loved and special. Not long afterwards, Victoria became pregnant with their first child. She stopped working as a junior in the law firm where she was employed to prepare for the upcoming birth. At around that time, Hugo was busy working on a new novel and experiencing more and more visions. They came to him at all times during the day and night. But with the visions also came very bad headaches. Hugo was okay with the pain because they inspired him. Victoria, however, became increasingly concerned about his health and found Hugo growing more and more distant. She felt terribly left out. As she neared her due date, she tried to talk to Hugo about his headaches and visions. "Hugo, you need to see a doctor about your headaches. They're not normal." "When have they ever been normal?" Hugo replied, distracted. "But they seem to be happening more and more frequently, aren't they?" Hugo nodded, and to ease Victoria's concerns, Hugo reluctantly agreed to see a doctor. When he visited the doctor for the first time, the doctor was not familiar with Hugo's books and asked him what they were about. Hugo explained to the doctor that he wrote stories about another world, which was perfect, and that the main character was a princess named Emily, the name by which Hugo and Victoria planned to call their own baby. Hugo explained that Princess Emily spent a lot of her time exploring her world with her best friend Mike. Unlike the real world, animals were their friends, and they helped Mike and Princess Emily do amazing things like fly them to the tops of the highest mountains with flocks of birds. They never got hurt and were unafraid because of it. Once on the top of mountains, they could go skiing and sledding down the massive slopes for hours. They could explore caves and forests and remote islands, and when they had had enough, delicious food would appear instantly when they unfolded a tablecloth, and it was as much as they needed. They could walk across the oceans in a few steps and spend time with their families singing and performing songs for their king. Though the king was the ruler, all his citizens were treated with love and respect and were equal. His people were incredibly industrious without ever growing weary and tired, forever designing and creating beautiful clothing, furniture, and buildings to extend the king's castle. The landscapes were full of gold and jewels, though they were never fought over or used for trade. There was no need for money, because everyone lived well, was happy, and had everything they needed. No one had ever shed a tear in that world. The doctor listened to all this, fascinated, and decided to run some tests on Hugo. Some weeks later, Victoria and Hugo drove to the hospital. Victoria was in the middle of having contractions, and their baby was close to being born. But on that day, Hugo experienced more headaches than he ever had before. The terrible migraines let him see into the perfect world, and he watched as some terrible events unfolded. He wanted to support Victoria, but got caught up in something that he never imagined could happen. That perfect world began to unravel the moment Princess Emily's best friend Mike scared her. It was not intentional, but what followed was truly heartbreaking. At that time, Mike had just come of age and was wearing his protective armor, which he used to enter the magical border that separated them from the lands beyond theirs. He had always wondered what lay beyond their lands, and now he saw what this was. As he looked out, he saw terrible war, carnage, and mayhem. He saw things that he could not have faced and understood as a boy, but now did as a young man. He knew at that moment there existed two places, one which was horrible, and the other which was good, and he was blessed to live in. The border between the two places kept them apart, but it was a precarious situation. The border could only protect them if the good people obeyed the law of their perfect kingdom, which was to never pass beyond the border. He saw it all now, as he wiped tears from his eyes. It was his rite of passage, and only men were allowed to engage in it. Just after this, he returned from the border and saw Emily playing innocently nearby with a ball. He immediately told her off for being so close to the border that everyone was warned to stay away from. Emily got such a shock from his telling off, frightened by his stance and the armor he was wearing. She ran away from him in tears. Mike felt awful because he never intentionally wanted to hurt Emily. But before he could get to her, to explain and apologize to her for scaring her, she was met by unicorns who carried her away from him. The unicorns took Emily to a magical crystal lake. It was different from any she had seen before because it was made up from the tears of angels. The unicorns told Emily that if she was strong enough to dive in, she would no longer be afraid and understand that her best friend Mike was only being protective over her. Emily was afraid of the water, especially because it consisted of the tears of angels, but she also wanted to conquer her fear and not be ruled by it. So she took a leap of faith and dived in. She witnessed beautiful fish and mermaids. When she came out, she saw she had also come of age and was no longer a girl. The unicorns told her that true love would soon find her, and she needed to be brave enough to face it. On the way back to the castle, Emily saw something glinting in the sun. She went over to it and saw it was Mike's armor, which he had dropped and hastily taken off after making her cry. The armor was by the magical border of their land. As she picked the helmet up, she grew jealous of Mike for being able to wear it and see what was beyond their land. She wished she was a man like him. Then she heard someone shouting and crying for help. The voice was from beyond the border and sounded like a man who was in terrible pain. Emily knew she shouldn't cross the border, but when the man continued to cry out for help, she answered him. She thought he was about to die and tried to save him. She passed through the magical border that separated their world from the evil beyond, destroying the protective barrier and putting her whole kingdom in danger. But she couldn't help the man because he died from his wounds. She had never seen blood before and was horrified that people could be so evil as to harm one another. Before she could return to Mike, she watched as her land was overrun by an evil army. The army came on war horses, their hooves trampling the perfect flowers on the ground. Everything good quickly began to fade and disappear, including the perfect people and unicorns, leaving nothing but imperfections. Emily's features began to change as she became less perfect, and she pleaded with her elders who originally set up the magical barrier for a chance to make things right before they all disappeared. They used their remaining power to transport Emily backwards in time via a portal to fix things. But something went wrong and she found herself a baby in the present age. Her true love, Mike, chased after her and slipped through the portal just as it closed. This is what Hugo saw, just as his wife gave birth to their daughter. A few weeks later, doctors diagnosed him as suffering from a brain tumor. He underwent treatment to remove the tumor, after which the headaches, dizziness, and inspiring visions were gone, and he suffered terribly from writer's block. His last snapshot of the world was in seeing it overrun by evil. He was very unhappy now because even though he was cured, he could no longer see into this idealistic world, and he worried that it really had collapsed as he had witnessed. Victoria thought this was ludicrous and couldn't stop Hugo from obsessing over it. Hugo told fans of the books that his stories were of a real world that was now gone because evil invaded it. He told them that we are all to blame for the world's problems and that we could never live in a perfect world as we are. because we would stuff things up. The evil in our hearts would just corrode any idealistic world. To make money, Hugo began to work as a journalist for a news website. His reports were seldom about anything good, and he grew increasingly depressed. When Emily, their daughter, was 7 years old, her parents divorced, and her mother got together with a scholar who she had an affair with while studying at university to get her PhD. Victoria had an affair partly because her relationship had become strained because Hugo was so unhappy, and also because she grew excited by the academic life and scholar who thought like her and made her feel attractive again. She felt trapped by her marriage, which she thought had gone stale. The divorce further broke Hugo's heart. He became completely disenchanted about life and wanted to protect his daughter from this life. Emily spent time between her two parents. When she was with her mother, Victoria the lawyer and scholar, the conversation was always about real things and being grounded in life. But when she was with her father, she heard him tell her fanciful fairy tales, which she loved, about a princess who was engaged to marry a charming young man named Mike and was going to live happily ever after. But her father never finished the story, and it was always about the early adventures of Mike and Princess Emily, and never about the final wedding and happy ever after. Emily loved the stories her father told her. She clung to the stories because they didn't involve horrible things like divorce, which is what happened to her parents. She knew she was named after Princess Emily from her father's stories and wished more and more that she was like her, because Princess Emily was perfect. As Emily grew older and became familiar with all her father's books, she made the horrible discovery that Princess Emily was actually to blame for the collapse of the perfect world in which she had lived in. All because she had broken the law and crossed over the protective barrier that had surrounded their lands. On realizing this, Emily was hugely disappointed and needed reassurance that this wasn't the end of the story. She held out hope that her father knew of a way to fix things in the stories he had written so that they would still end happily. But her father was out of ideas. As Emily grew up, she continued to hold on to the perfect world idea, wanting it more than ever. She was not very interested in the world around her, but dove into her father's books whenever she had the chance. Emily was bothered by all the same things in the modern world that her father was bothered by. Things like poverty, climate change, pollution, and war. Suffering, death, and evil were all up there too. The other students in her school were getting on with teenage things and wondered what was wrong with Emily. "Don't you think Emily is weird?" the other kids would say about Emily behind her back. Yes, she probably gets that from her father. He's just as strange. Meanwhile, Emily could see her father was struggling and decided to help him write another story about the perfect and beautiful world, even though it no longer existed in his mind and he couldn't catch glimpses of it anymore. Through encouraging her father to write, they reimagined and recreated the world. In the new story they wrote together, Emily and her father described how Princess Emily and her true love Mike were transported through a portal into the modern world. They were helpless babes now, as they were born again. Neither of them remembered the past. The king of their lost world still existed in spirit form and watched over them, guiding their steps. Though they were the last of their kind because they now lived in the present age, they neither realized this nor knew about one another. They were no longer perfect, struggling now in a way they had never experienced before, but they also had a unique gift to help them restore their lost lands. A belief that anything was possible, which gave them a faith that could move mountains. On growing up, they begin to see they can manifest positive change in their lives, and there's the potential for them to grow rich and successful in the world. Though their calling is to restore the perfect lands, there is real danger that they will fail at their task and never see their lost lands again. Ultimately, they must choose wisely so they do not get caught by the trappings of the world. Will they use their gifts to live like kings and queens in the present age, or will they bring back their lost lands? When Emily showed the manuscript to her mother Victoria, she didn't want to read it. She told Emily, "Don't waste your time dreaming about things that will never happen and aren't real. There are still plenty of good things in the world, and you need to focus on those things and chase after them. Like getting a good education and job. That's the key to being grounded and finding happiness in life." Victoria told Emily that anything was possible if you remained positive. You can manifest whatever you want in life and become a winner if you just remain positive. That's how you came into my life. Because I wanted a beautiful daughter, and that's what I got. Victoria warned Emily not to shoot herself in the foot by letting herself down and wallowing in sad feelings like her father had done. Although Victoria's words were harsh, Hugo found success with his new book that he had written together with Emily. It was hugely popular because it had the happy ending that all his readers longed for. So Hugo felt a bit better by seeing that his story was appreciated, but he still felt sad because it was the first time he had to make it up, instead of seeing it play out in front of his eyes. Emily's mother Victoria instructed Emily to think about her future as she neared the end of high school, instead of having her head in the clouds like her father. Emily worried that maybe her mother was right. She finally decided to try manifesting to bring about positive change in her life. Not long afterwards, Emily noticed changes happening. She thought it was just that she was growing out of her awkward teenage years and maturing. But this was not the case. She had tapped into a unique power that she had, and found she could make her problems disappear by focusing on what she wanted and wishing them into existence. She had a faith that could move mountains. She had not found life easy before this, but now she began to transform. She became more confident and popular. She no longer struggled with remembering her lessons at school, gaining a perfect memory in the process. She also became very athletic and made the decision to run in a marathon. Even though the changes happened rapidly, and were amazing due to the fact that they came about simply because Emily wished them into existence, she did not think anything of it. She assumed everyone could do this. She stopped feeling sorry for people who were struggling and began to look down on them, thinking it was their own fault they weren't excelling in life like she was. She didn't know any different and so didn't even feel bad about thinking this way. On the day of the marathon, at the starting blocks, Emily was pushed by the crowd so that she stumbled over the feet of another runner, twisting her ankle. The young man who she tripped over helped her catch a taxi home and gave her his phone number. But she wasn't interested in him because of how regularly she was getting phone numbers from boys who liked her now that she was different. Emily was finally starting to feel more comfortable and connected to the world she lived in, like her mother. Her father, who noticed the changes, could see she was letting go of his stories and cared less and less for that lost perfect world. This concerned him because Emily and him had always shared a common passion, and now he saw her slipping away from him. So he took Emily to the ranch in the countryside where he had proposed to Victoria. They went horse riding together. Hugo told Emily, "This is one of the places where I used to catch glimpses of that once perfect world. I want to show you other places too, where my inspiring visions happened." Hugo hoped that the places would ignite something in Emily too, and that she would also see into that lost world. But Emily didn't see anything. Instead, she planned to study law like her mother Victoria and talked about nothing else, putting to rest all the fanciful ideas of her childhood. On the last day before they were to head back to the city, they went for a swim together in a lake. Emily raced her father because she was an excellent swimmer and wanted to show off. He chased after her, trying to keep up when all of a sudden he suffered from cramps and had trouble staying afloat. Emily didn't notice at first, but when she looked around to see where he was, she saw him flailing. She managed to save him from drowning, but the thought of how close she had come to losing him made her anxious for the first time since she had begun to bring about change in her life. The things that matter the most I cannot control, Emily thought. Even though I was getting smarter because I was focusing on this in my life, I could lose those I love and care about tomorrow, and where would that leave me? Just alone. A soft voice, that she assumed was her conscience, told her that she was using her power like a wishing well to get the things she wanted, but that she needed to think carefully about what she was wishing for, because it was changing her. You have a power that can make the whole world good. If you use it on yourself only, it will make you rich, but your gift will have been squandered. Emily got scared and thought, but why am I so special that I can't make myself successful? Everyone else wants personal success in their lives. Why can't I chase after this too? The soft voice told her to reflect on how she had changed from pursuing her own ends in life. As she reflected on this change, she thought, I have always wanted to be perfect. I now have a great memory, am athletic and regularly win competitions, and having all these things has made my life much easier. Is it possible that I am less concerned now about serious problems in this world, the way I used to be? Because I don't have any myself. Maybe I am not turning more perfect, but vain and selfish. Emily decided to support her father by attending the next book signing by his side, and was reminded how much his world was loved by others, and that it was very special. On that day she met a young man named Mike. He seemed familiar to her, but she could not place him. The young man was in awe of Hugo, and told him he was a real fan. I really liked your latest book. Especially the way Mike and Emily meet in the modern world, when they both decide to participate in a marathon. They are both super competitive and want to be first, until they trip over each other when the crowd pushes them together at the start of the race. And that's how they first meet and exchange phone numbers. When Emily heard this, she realized where she had seen this young man before. It was during the marathon she had run in the city 2 months earlier. He had given her his phone number, but she had never rung him back. Now she felt embarrassed and hoped he didn't recognize her. Hugo told the young man that he couldn't have written his latest book without the help of his daughter Emily. When Mike looked at Emily, they both felt embarrassed because they remembered where they had met. Emily apologized for throwing away his number and decided to make it up to him by sharing a coffee together. The next day they met up at a cafe and talked more about the latest book that Hugo and Emily had written together. Mike was curious about who had come up with the idea to have the two main characters in the book become friends in the modern world, only for Mike to suffer from a major stroke and nearly die. Emily admitted that this was her idea. It's really terrible, I know, and means they struggle, but the real purpose for this is that their minds and hearts are strengthened during this time, like gold refined by fire, so that they are stronger for what follows. Later their king speaks to them, telling them how they can bring back their lost perfect lands. It is by using just their unique powers. Their faith is so strong in the end they can literally move mountains. They visualize and call back into existence their lost lands. Before this they wouldn't have been strong enough to do this. That night, Mike and Emily both had incredible dreams. They woke up with a start.
Wish I got superpowers. Your hands touching my hand. Want your fingers everywhere. Don't wanna wake up. Wish that I was brave, but I've never been the one. Wish that we could stay like this. I wanna stay. Wish that I was brave, but I've never been the one. Wish that we could stay like this, I wanna stay. If I got superpowers, I'll stop the clock. Be right here in this moment. superpowers.
Emily dreamt she had been living in a perfect land until she crossed the border, and Mike dreamt he had chased her into the modern world. Forgotten memories from a long dead past flashed before their eyes. What had once just been a story to them was now real. They trembled as it dawned on them that they weren't just named after their favorite book characters, but really were them. They were the last of their kind and had once been perfect. Now everything made sense to them, and Emily understood why the way they lived their lives mattered so much. We have the power to bring back what was lost. They picked up their phones and called each other. But how is this possible? Emily knew how. My father's books have all the answers in them. He recorded our past. We lived during a time when the whole world was young. Our lands were so perfect back then that no one beyond our border would have ever seen or known about them. But ever since the barrier broke, the two places became one. I know my mother Victoria always considered me very special because she was told she would never be able to have children. She started practicing manifestation and did all kinds of things to try and get pregnant, but in the end it wasn't any of that which helped. Only the power of that lost world brought us here. Mike, do you think we can fix things? Do you think it's possible? Mike felt a great burden fall on his shoulders at that moment, but he tried to be positive and said, there must be a way to fix things. We just need to be strong. If we were truly perfect in the past, we need to live as perfectly now as possible, since we know our shared history. I believe it's the only way to fix things. Not long afterwards, Emily's mother, Victoria, announced her engagement to the scholar. They had been tossing around the idea to get married for years already, and now finally decided to tie the knot. They planned a party that Emily had to attend. Emily didn't want to go at first until Mike said he would come with her. Emily couldn't face seeing her mother moving on with her life and blamed her for the divorce until Mike reminded Emily that everyone makes mistakes and not to hate her mother. Hugo, Emily's father, was still struggling with the divorce and had been celibate and alone the whole time. When he heard about the engagement party, he got really drunk and crashed the lawn party. The guests who were invited to the party were all quite well off and included a lot of successful self-made business people. Hugo told Victoria that she must feel great to have moved up in life and that she probably never loved him. He began to blame Victoria for his misery until Emily and Mike rescued the situation by separating them both and taking the rest of the guests away from the scene, back inside to the main dining room area. Emily tried to calm down her father, which made Victoria accuse Hugo of stealing her daughter away from her. She burst into tears, and Hugo stormed off. 2 months later, the worst imaginable thing happened as Mike suffered from a major stroke and nearly died. Emily was horrified by this event, even more so because it was just as it had been described in the pages of Hugo and Emily's book. Now they had to live through the ordeal and not just read about it in a book. The experience was very hard on them. Emily did everything to support Mike in his recovery. It meant stopping her studies and caring for him. Hugo understood this decision, but Victoria, Emily's mother, didn't want her daughter to sacrifice everything for a man. What about your studies? You will fall behind and may never complete them. Emily tried to explain to her mother that she was in love with Mike, but Victoria was now very cynical and said, "You're too young to know what love is." Mike had to learn to walk again. He needed a lot of rehabilitation. At their lowest point, 1 year into their struggle, Mike and Emily wished they could hear the voice of their king as they both needed encouragement, but he did not speak to them like he had in the book Emily had written with her father. Emily began to cry, and Mike told her not to. "There is a way we can fix things, we just have to be strong and not give up," said Mike. Emily said, "I don't know what the future holds, maybe things won't all go like I wrote, but I know what I want. I love you so much that I want to get married to you. I want it more than anything." "But what will your parents think?" said Mike. They'll accept it, as it's my decision, whether they like it or not, said Emily. She was so determined when she said this that Mike believed her. 2 more months passed by, and they got married. It was just as Emily had wanted it. Her parents, though worried about her, accepted the decision and supported Mike and Emily in getting married. Mike, who had been slowly recovering, was greatly encouraged by the show of family unity and suddenly began to improve much more rapidly. Emily became ever more determined to have life continue to go well for them. She deliberately tapped into her unique power to bring about lasting positive change in her life. She wished for everything to be perfect now. After what they had both been through, she felt they deserved it. To have a happy, healthy, and productive life. Her parents had made peace with each other, and Mike was almost fully recovered. Things looked like they were finally starting to go well for them. It was at this time that Emily heard the King of the Lost Land speak through her conscience. Emily, soon you will have everything you have ever wanted in this world and be incredibly happy. But you are special, as you know, and were once perfect. So your path in this life has not been an easy one. You are not like everyone else, and you should remember that. You must make a choice. If you really want the perfect lands that were lost to return, you cannot use your power on the things of this world. You know that you have a gift, but it was given to you for one purpose only, to bring back our lost lands. If you use it for the wrong things, you will never see me again. Emily became afraid and asked what she must do. You are mentally strong enough now to fix things because your willpower is incredibly strong. Journey to the place where Mike dropped his armor in haste and where you first stepped across the border, said the king. If you go there now, you will find the armor, and that is the thing you need to bring back the lost lands. She knew the coordinates of that place, as they were etched into her soul. She left a message to both their parents and Mike, feeling it was so urgent now, and critical that she didn't even say a proper goodbye. If I were to talk it over with any of my family, they would only try to dissuade me, Emily thought. She paid for flight tickets over the phone and was about to head to the airport when Mike walked in. He asked her what she was doing, then saw the note and realized she was about to leave for a remote place in the countryside. You know this is not how the story you wrote goes, said Mike. To fix things, they go together. You can't do it all on your own. Did you hear the king speak to you? Emily nodded. Suddenly she panicked. What if it doesn't work and we fail? Asked Emily. Don't say that. We need to commit to this 100% or we really will fail, said Mike. They took a plane to the coordinates into the countryside. By the time they got to the exact location, it was the last day of the year and late at night. Then they saw something glinting in the moonlight, and sure enough, it was a part of Mike's armor. He picked it up ecstatically and hugged Emily. It's amazing, you're amazing. They looked up into the sky and saw hundreds of shooting stars whizzing past them. Just then, they heard cries and voices. It was Victoria and Hugo, Emily's parents. What are you doing here, Mom and Dad? Asked Emily. We're here for you, said Victoria. We know what you are trying to do and understand how you feel. You have both been very brave and have gone through some terrible moments of testing so early in your lives. But just because some of the events you went through are the same as in the final chapters of the book you wrote together with your father doesn't mean you are Princess Emily and Mike from that fairy tale. Honey, that sort of thing is impossible. Don't get swept up in a fairy tale that isn't real. Emily held up the armor, to the great surprise of Victoria. But how can this be? She was amazed and speechless. Emily and Mike knew they must act, so they locked hands and thought about their perfect lands. They willed their perfect world back into existence. But nothing happened. After trying again, they became distraught and cried that it was too hard and that they weren't strong enough. But to their surprise, Hugo and Victoria locked hands with them too, saying they wanted it as much as Mike and Emily. If there really is such a place, it will make everyone happy. Of course we want to help. But that's not how it goes in the book, said Emily. But that's how it should go, pointed out her parents. At that moment, a blinding flash and pulse of energy radiated out across the land. The landscape began to transform into that of ancient lands and villages, beyond which was a castle. People from the perfect world reappeared. The king and queen of the castle welcomed Emily and Mike. They hugged each other, and both Emily and Mike were transformed. She became like she was when she had stepped out of the water and had come of age, and Mike did too. Meanwhile, Hugo and Victoria were completely blown away by the beauty in front of them. Victoria had never imagined anything like it, and for the first time in her life, she felt inadequate, like she didn't belong there or deserve it. She asked, "What must I do to be allowed to stay here with you all, when I myself am so far from perfect?" For she had an inkling that only perfect people could live in a perfect world. But everyone just smiled at her, and she knew that she was accepted. She didn't even realize that the very act of asking this question had transformed her too. And so it was for everyone else, as the perfect world changed lives. It stretched on without end, and no longer had a border. There was nothing to fear anymore, because all the bad things that used to exist were gone for good. Everyone lived happily ever after. The end.
Keep it on the floor